Nice, cool. All right. Welcome everybody to the October edition of Advocacy in Action. I'm glad you all could make it. And for those of you who are able to be in San Antonio, it was nice to see you in person. With the midterms about 3-ish weeks away, I thought it'd be timely to talk about the elections and kind of what they'll mean for ONP and how you can make the most of the results. So in this presentation, I hope that those are kind of the three main questions that I'll be able to answer for us. What are the predicted results? What do they mean for advocacy in our field? And how can you personally make the most of the midterms as a practitioner, as a voter, as a citizen, etc. Oh, and also forgot to mention, Advocate of the Month will be announced after this, so please stay tuned for that announcement. So I wanted to start with the Senate results. For this presentation, my source is 538, which is a polling website created by statistician Nate Silver. That's one of those words, it's tough for me, statistician. But to predict the results, he took 40,000 results, simulated results in a model that he developed, and then took a random sample of 100 of those outcomes to show what the model kind of thought was most likely. And based on this model, the Democratic Party is slightly favored to win the US Senate, with 67 of 100 scenarios resulting in at least 50 Democratic senators, with the vice president being the tie-breaking vote in that chamber. So the graph you see here visualizes this. Each dot is one of the 100 outcomes. On either side is a result that leads to a majority in either party. And as you can see, most of the results are kind of clustered around the 50 to 51 Democrat senator kind of outcome. The narrow margin of victory is due to the fact that a lot of the elections aren't super close, and it's 50-50 right now in the Senate. There are some exceptions. There's Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Those are all that are slightly leaning Democratic, but they're still very, very close. And again, these results are changing by the day. So if you go onto the website now, it'll most likely be slightly different than what you see here, and it will continue to fluctuate over the next 3-ish weeks. So for the House, the Republican Party is slightly favored to win the House, with 70 of 100 outcomes resulting in more than 218 seats or more, which is the majority in that chamber. In this result, most of the outcomes are between 218 and 240 seats total for the Republican Party, which is a pretty big pickup considering that the split right now is 220 Democrat Congress people and 212 Republican Congress people, with 3 vacancies. So what can we conclude based on this result, based in both chambers? Looks like the 118th Congress is going to be a divided one. So a post-midterm divided Congress and government as a whole actually is pretty much the norm in contemporary US politics. Part of the reason for this is that midterms typically see gains from the opposition party and losses from the president's party. This table demonstrates this. It's from UC Santa Barbara's American Presidency Project. And as you can see, since 1982, there's only been 2 instances in the House where the party in power gained seats, and only 3 instances where that happened in the Senate. So normally, President's party loses quite a bit of ground during the midterms. So the sizable swings in Congress held by each party, it often leads to a divided government as a whole, along with the divided Congress that we'll see in this go around, most likely. This table is from the House of Representatives Office of the Historian, and it shows whether the government is divided or unified based on whether the president, Senate, and House are all controlled by the same party. And as you can see, back to 1983, there are only 6 instances where the government was completely unified the entire time. And although the 117th Congress, our current iteration, is unified on paper, it's sort of not. In some ways, it is divided in the sense that although the Democratic Party controls both houses, both chambers of Congress and the presidency, there are the 2 swing votes in the Senate in Manchin and Sinema that lead to a lot of difficulties with the Democratic Party kind of enacting their agenda. So, just to say, this is kind of the norm. It's not a crazy thing to happen. It's very much in line with previous results. So what does this mean for O&P and kind of generally advocacy? One word, it's gridlock, which you can see from this very frustrating picture right here. So divided control over the policymaking process that kind of happens in divided government, and it really increases the time it takes to pass legislation. Must pass bills, which are kind of like continued government funding and the NDAA for the Defense Department and the military, those are still enacted, but they move through Congress much more slowly because the opposition kind of wants to stall the party in power. Presidential priorities are also very unlikely to pass or kind of gain a lot of traction because the opposition party does not want the president to have any kind of legislative wins, and any of those priorities that are along partisan lines, those are very unlikely to pass. Those are pretty much, out of there. And this is kind of supported in the literature. There was a study by the London School of Economics and Political Science in 2015. They analyzed 2,000 bills, major bills in Congress over the last half century, so over 50 years, and they found that the average difference in the time to enact important legislation between divided and unified governments is 60 days. And although that doesn't seem like a lot, given that legislative sessions are 2 years long, that's 2 months worth. And that's quite a bit, given especially the amount of time that Congress is in recess. And on top of that, the polarization of the political climate was correlated with the length of time to enact legislation. And as the parties now are pretty much as divided as they've ever been, it's really taking a toll on the ease of enactment of must-pass legislation. So there's actually a kind of a silver lining to this when it comes to O&P. The bipartisan nature of the bills that are kind of at play right now in our field, the Medicare O&P Patient-Centered Care Act, the Wounded Warrior Workforce and Research Enhancement Act, and the Hannah-Vankara Service Act, it makes them much more likely to continue to gain momentum and see some results in a divided government. Because these provisions there's something for everybody in these bills. They help increase access to healthcare. They save the government money, and they help our military and veterans. And that's something that the most Republican and the most Democrat can agree in some ways that some of those provisions are helpful. So how can you make the most of the midterms? The first thing I would suggest is to check your voter registration, learn more about the voting process in your state, and cast your vote for the midterms, whether that's on election day or early or absentee voting. The Amputee Coalition has a really great resource for this. I put the link in the chat, but this site allows you to put in your information, and it'll tell you if you're registered, the polling place that you would be using, and the kind of the rules and regulations around voting in your state. So I'd highly suggest checking that out in order to see where you're at and make sure you're prepared. I'd also suggest that you learn a lot about the candidates for your district or state, not only for how you'll decide to vote in the election itself, but to understand how receptive they are and how understanding they are about O&P issues. And in this respect, AOPA can assist you with learning more through Capital Canary, our grassroots and kind of intelligence software. This is a page that you can create through our software for Chuck Grassley, who's a major co-sponsor of our bill. This has his kind of biography, his staffers, committee assignments, previous voting history. There's a lot of information in there that we can provide you, and please let me know if I can help in that respect, because it's a pretty easy process, and if the more information you have, the better it is for your voting, and the more understanding you have of how to kind of talk to them about the issues, which leads me to my next point. You should be developing a relationship with these policymakers once the elections are over. Building a foundation through kind of proactive outreach and shared interests or hobbies, it goes a long way for the moment that you do have an ask to go to your legislator with. In a way, you want to be that first person that pops into their head when they come across an issue related to O&P. You want them to say, "Oh, John, yeah, he works at the clinic over here. I should send him a message and ask him about this bill." That's like a really great way to develop that relationship, is by reaching out first and telling them, "Hello, I work here. Here are some of the issues that affect my business. And if you have any questions, please let me know." And the picture here is a great example of this. AOPA's board member, Jeff Brandt, he was on a visit with Congressman Jeff Joyce recently, or relatively recently, and they both kind of talked about the healthcare profession, as Congressman Joyce is a medical doctor, and they bonded over that and their kind of Pennsylvania roots, and it kind of left a great impression on the congressman. And over the next couple of months, they communicated. Jeff asked a couple questions about the bill and asked about whether Congressman Joyce would support it. And in the end, he was added on to as a co-sponsor of HR 1990. So it does help to have that relationship, and knowing the staffers and the member of Congress themselves is very, very important for getting things done from an advocacy perspective. And then finally, although I've been talking about federal issues in this presentation, it's important to know that state level elections are also happening at the same time. 36 governors are under election this year, and around a third of the states, or more than a third of the states actually, have elections for positions like treasurer, attorney general, and secretaries of state, not to mention the state level legislators that are also seeking office at this time. And for these elections, all of the same principles that I've discussed apply to kind of figure out your voting information, learning about your candidates, and forming relationships with them. And in many ways, kind of, it is easier to create that relationship with your legislators on the state level because of the smaller scale. They're not traveling to and from Washington, D.C. every couple of months. They're still in your state. They may have more in common with you in the day-to-day than you'd realize. So I was wondering, does anybody have any questions or kind of insights into maybe how they've done something like this in the past? That would be really appreciated. I know I dug into some data there, so. All right, well, that sounds good. I think now would be a good time to do our advocate of the month, if that's all right with you, Joy. Is that something we should do?
I think so.
All right. Well, October's advocate of the month. I'd like to congratulate Jeff Wensman for his involvement in our grassroots advocacy on our Phone to Action platform. We really appreciate the support and your letter writing to legislators that will help, propel O&P issues to the forefront. And so we will be sending you a Starbucks gift card, and I will be following up to get your information after this meeting.
I can say is, wow, that I would never have guessed. Thank you.
We appreciate it. No, it's important to write these letters to let people know, and also when you write these, it is, like I said, great to follow up kind of personally. If you can find the contact info for staffers, I can always find that for people if they want to know who best to contact in an office regarding legislation that you're looking to voice your support for. So if anybody needs that, please let me know, and I'd be happy to help.
I liked your suggestion about reaching out right after the election. I'm sure they like being congratulated. I didn't know what your knowledge is of how many of these letters they get and who actually reads them, where the greatest impact is, but that isn't something I've ever done before, and it does sound like a nice thing to do.
Yeah, it does. The amount of kind of traffic that a legislator gets, I think it really depends on their kind of notoriety level or their involvement. There might be a freshman congressperson out there who isn't from a very populous state. They might not get as much mail as a Nancy Pelosi or a Mitch McConnell type figure who'd get a lot more, even if it's outside of their district. But that kind of personalized contact will always help, especially if you are a constituent, telling them about that, like mentioning kind of something that you might have a connection with them concerning, is helpful. And that's why it's important to look up those little bits of information. Sometimes it's like, oh, I saw from your campaign website that you're an avid cyclist. Like I ride my bike everywhere. Like that's something small like that is enough to get your foot in the door.
That's good to know. Is there also posted, I plead ignorance, I apologize in advance, of just talking points for the year ahead so that I don't have to make it up?
In terms of the our bill, the Medicare O&P Patient-Centered Care Act, or
yeah, just so you can take the highlights, not to make it a whole new form letter to them, but just saying, I hope you'll support this, or what key things that are important
yeah,
to the Democrats or to the Republicans, so you can write different letters to different people based on their take. I'm making it up as I'm talking here, but
no, you've hit the nail on the head. That's they definitely have different kind of arguments that appeal to them, and we do have our fact sheet that we have on the website that is pretty helpful in terms of that. I would say that when we're talking about Democrats versus Republican arguments, the offices that we talk to, the Democrats are a lot more receptive to arguments of healthcare access. And then I would say Republicans are concerned chiefly with kind of the financial impacts of a bill, whether it's costing the government money or saving the government money, and also how it's impacting like small businesses or business in general. So if you can, tailoring it in those ways is very helpful, and knowing understanding kind of the fact sheet, understanding the bill, and making sure to change those arguments given the situation.
Thanks again.
Sam, I was also going to say that their social media is a good way to get more information about them. And then also you guys are really great about providing information for staff members. and you can make LinkedIn connections, and they actually respond if you find out they're, get a promotion or have a birthday or something. You can really start developing the staff relationships, which I have learned from you guys over the past couple of years, really is what gets you heard by the politician themselves, is their staff members that they surround themselves with. So it's really good to follow them on social media and to keep up with them and make those connections on a regular basis as well.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah. And then at a certain point, like I mentioned, you'll become kind of the go-to for them. I know for the Wounded Warrior legislation, Representative Matt Cartwright reached out to AOPA kind of unprompted, saying that hey, we're going to reintroduce this bill next session or this session. Here's the language. How can we make this better? Does this look good to you as kind of representatives of the O&P field? And that's definitely a powerful thing when you get to that point in your relationships with individual members. All right. Anybody have any other questions, comments? I appreciate that, Dana and Jeff.
Hey, Sam, this is Elisa Kovala. I'm with Tilgis here in Minnesota, and I have a question about once a bill gets into the Congress and the Senate, and it's just sitting there, it just, percolating, virtually doing nothing. What is something that, and it introduced by people not from my state. So what I'm really particularly talking about is the Promoting Access to Diabetic Shoes Act that has been introduced in the House and Senate 2018, and then that was done, and then it was introduced last year again in 2021, but really nothing's happened with it. And it's something that we still provide diabetic shoes and inserts at my company, and we'd really like to get this passed because it is a tough road with this nurse practitioners not being able to do things. So just you have some insight on that?
I think that the best thing to do in those types of situations is come to us. I think that we're, as kind of the national representatives or association for practitioners, we can reach out to members from kind of any area and let them know how we feel about given legislation. I think it also could be helpful if you find out the main co-sponsor of a bill and reach out to them, or the main sponsor of a bill, the person who first introduced it, and reaching out to them, because they'll either have a reason to reintroduce or not reintroduce. And once you figure that out, I think that you can do a lot of work with advocating for its reintroduction, or saying, hey, we're experts in this. We're a business that this legislation would affect, and we have that kind of knowledge of the consequences of passing or not passing this bill that would be really valuable to you.
That's a good idea. I did do that back in 2018. They were from, I believe, Illinois and possibly Indiana, but I was so excited about it back then. And so I sent them information. I said, hey, I'm from Minnesota. I'll do whatever you want. What can I do? I can advocate my state. I can do whatever you need. But, and I haven't reached out to this group. So possibly it is something. I know Senator Tammy Duckworth was one of them. There's 37 representatives that co-signed in the House area. But yeah, something definitely to do. It seems so small, but it would be huge if that was passed.
Absolutely. No, the smaller ones are usually, it's a little easier to pass those because they're not as controversial. They're not like picked up by the media and kind of attacked from different sides. So it's a lot easier to figure out how to place those in kind of a larger vehicle, like the continuing resolutions or different like funding mechanisms for departments.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Of course. And if you would like to discuss more, please shoot me an email. That sounds
Absolutely.
great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Does anybody else have any questions?
Sam, I was just gonna maybe chime in with a question. You had mentioned in your presentation on Capital Canary that individuals could kind of go in there and see which representatives or, members of Congress were more keen to O&P. Is that something that people have their own registration link or username that they can dive in there themselves?
That's typically kind of something that AOPA staff would do, only because there's like a limited number of registrations. It's a little different than the co-op, but that's something that I can absolutely look at for people. And I think something that you can do without Capital Canary is look at the bills that are in Congress currently, whether it's the Wounded Warrior bills, the Hannah Bankera bill, or our bill, and see who's sponsoring those, see who isn't, see what other types of bills they sponsor. Some members of Congress, they sponsor healthcare bills in general, but some are more aware of O&P specifically. So I think it's helpful to look at those kind of, it's like proxy issues. Like a lot of something that I use personally is if a member of Congress is receptive to issues of like care for seniors and kind of Medicare in general, most likely they'll be more interested in O&P issues, because a lot of O&P users are in the aging population.
Absolutely. That's helpful. And that makes sense to kind of have people look at the co-sponsors and people that have been behind the Workforce Enhancement Act and also the Medicare O&P Patient-Centered Care Act, when you're looking at, who are people that are supportive of O&P and that we want, still there.
Mhm. Definitely. All right. If anybody has any other questions that they kind of think of later, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be here. I'm just hanging out. And other than that, congrats to Jeff. We'll be talking to you after this, and I can give y'all a couple minutes of your day back. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come to Advocacy in Action, and hope to see you in November.
Thank you, Sam.
Mhm.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Make sure to vote, y'all.
Thanks, Sam.